Chapter 6, Valuing Real Estate. The definition of an appraisal is a supported, defended estimate of the value of real property as of a given date. In other words, it's what we think a property is worth. In 1989, the federal government passed some legislation that requires all appraisers that are doing an appraisal on any federally related transaction to be state certified. And they're going to either be state certified residential or state certified general appraisers. In statute, Florida statute, appraising is still a service of real estate. But I think that when a licensee holds themselves out to be an appraiser doing an appraisal, they're holding themselves out for some liability. That's why we do CMAs, or competitive market analysis. Appraisals are very strict with their rules and regulations. It's the USPAP standards that drive it, whereas a competitive market analysis is not. And so what I want to do today is kind of go through what the appraiser has to go through so that you will understand what the process is for appraising. The appraisal concepts. Let's talk about cost, price, and value. Cost is the amount of money that it takes to create a property, and that is to buy the land, to build the building, to pay for the carrying cost. Value is an imaginary number that we think it's worth. Price is the actual amount of money that somebody's willing to pay for it. Now, these three things may be similar, but they may not be. In other words, just because it costs a certain amount of money to build a home or to build a property doesn't mean somebody's going to be willing to pay that. They may pay more, they may pay less. It's important to note that one does not create the other. The types of value. Remember that we said it is a supported, defended estimate of the value of property rights. I think that it's going to be important for you to know the difference between the function of an appraisal and the purpose. It's going to be important that you know the difference between the function of an appraisal and the purpose. The function is what it's used for. The purpose is the type of value. Every appraiser has to determine the purpose or the objective of the appraisal. The function is not required. There are several types of value that we deal with: investment value, assessed value, liquidation value. The value that is the most prominent is market value. Market value is the value that the average person under average conditions would be willing to pay for a property. Now, what the bank is looking for is not just one person either. What the bank is saying is that we would like to know that there's more than one person that's going to be willing to pay what this person is willing to pay. That's why we say that the appraiser doesn't work for the buyer, the appraiser doesn't work for the seller, the appraiser works for the bank and wants to make sure that the bank is making the right decision in the loan. And when we talk about market value, we talk about both the buyer and seller being motivated under normal conditions, that they're well informed, that there's a reasonable amount of money that's spent in marketing, that is paid in US dollars, and the price represents arm's length. Now, what I'm talking about arm's length is that the buyer is looking out for the buyer's best interest and the seller is looking out for the seller's best interest. The principle of substitution is probably going to be one of those principles that we need to understand the most. And that basically says, why would I pay one price for a property if there's other properties that are being sold for less? A better way of saying it is, why would I pay $200,000 for a house if everybody else has been willing to pay less for that same identical house? So basically, the principle of substitution helps us set the upper limits of value. The principle of conformity basically says that what we want to do is build homes in a neighborhood that are consistent or like each other, and that usually will preserve certain values. Highest and best use, and there's two ways of looking at highest and best use. One if it's vacant land, and one if it's improved. To begin with, just vacant land. Highest and best use simply says, what can we do with this site that's going to cause it to be the most productive? That's going to cause it to generate us the greatest revenue. And when I say revenue, I mean net revenue. Highest and best use is a residual concept. In other words, it's what's left over. It's a net concept. If we're talking about a property that has an improvement on it, we say, okay, what can we do with this site that has this improvement that's going to cause it to be worth the most money to us, either through rentals or through value when we sell it? Do we leave what's on there? Do we renovate it? Then we have to factor in cost. Or do we demolish it and build something new? Then we have to worry about demolition cost and then reconstruction. Remember, this is a net concept, and all that has to be factored in. The steps in appraising. The very first step in the appraisal process is to define the problem. Defining the problem simply says, I'm going to identify the type of appraisal that I'm doing, whether it's residential, commercial, what is it that I'm doing? And then we do our preliminary analysis. Ultimately, what we're going to be doing is reconciling all of our findings. And so what I want to do right now is go through what the appraisal is, what the various forms are that we use, and the various types of appraisals will be coming up next. Let's talk about appraisal types, and there are several. Probably the one that is the most used is going to be the form report. The form report is one that's used by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in most of your residential transactions, vacant lots, and small income producing properties. We also have a narrative report. Now, the narrative falls into three categories, and the best way to remember a narrative is like a book. It is a very complex writing that goes into all kind of details. Typically, it's going to be the self-contained report that we're talking about. There's also a summary report that's used sometimes, and a restricted report. So those are the three categories of the narrative report. The next chapter we're going to be dealing with are going to be the three types of appraisals. But in the meantime, what I'd like to do is go ahead and review with you Chapter 6 summary. To begin with, persons doing an appraisal for a federally related loan is required to be state certified. Licensees are also allowed to do CMAs for a fee. Cost is the amount of money to create a property. Value is the amount of money it believes to be worth. Price is the amount actually paid. The most common type of value is market value. The first step in the appraisal process is to define the problem. The three types of appraisal reports: oral report, form report, which is the most common, and narrative. The three types of narrative reports include self-contained, the summary, and the restricted report. And that's the end of your Chapter 6 summary.